Hello everyone. Today I will introduce you to meet Spring. Some of you may have heard or seen about this word in many tech stacks these days. So, what Spring really is? Spring is the most popular application development framework of Java. The application framework is the tool that helps you to develop the application quicker, easier, and safer. After we know what Spring is, so why do we want to use Spring? What makes it interesting? Spring is designed and created depending on the concept of inversion of control and dependency injection. So let's start with the word inversion of control. For this example situation, assume that this is you, a software engineer, and your car. You need to go to the office for work. You drive your car to your workplace. This means that you control your car. However, the objective that you should do is to do the job, not to drive a car. Therefore, the inversion of control principle suggests you to invert the control, meaning that instead of driving the car yourself, you hire a driver, another person who will drive the car for you. This is called inversion of the control from you to the taxi driver. After that, you don't have to drive a car yourself, and you can let the driver do the driving so that you can focus on your main work. After we know about the concept of IOC, this concept led us to another word that we need to know is dependency injection. For example, assume that we have two classes, car and gear. Car wants to use some functionality of gear, so we create a new instance of gear in the car's constructor. When we create the instance of outer object in the cars, it means that the car needs to manage the life cycle of the object entity of gear cars. Therefore, this makes the car is independent on the gear, or we can call that gear cars as dependency of car cars. So this makes a coping of both classes that is good for testing and maintaining if there are more dependencies in the future. Therefore, to avoid that, we change it. Instead of creating the object in the class itself, we receive that object as a parameter in the constructor once we create the object. So the car class is unnecessary to handle creating the object again. This means that the gear cars will be injected from the outside of the car class. Therefore, this will make the both classes loosely coupled to each other. After we know about the principles that's being used to design their framework, let's see what features Spring has. Spring Framework provides the modules for development such as data access, such as JDBC, ORM, JMS, web framework such as Spring MVC, Spring Web, WebSocket, Servlet. Testing such as Test Context Framework, Mock Objects. Dynamic language use such as Kotlin, Groovy, etc. And what about pros and cons? For pros, lightweight. Spring is lightweight because of plain old Java objects implementation. It does not force you to implement any interfaces and inherit any classes. Flexible. It provides tons of libraries, and many options for configurations. Loose coupling. Spring with dependency injection makes the application loosely coupled. It allows injecting dependency without knowing where they come from. Secure. We can make our application secure by using the Spring Security Framework that provides industry standard security schemes. For cons, complexity. Working with Spring is complex. It requires a lot of expertise because of their configuration and modules. High learning curve. It would be difficult to learn if you don't have development experience in the field. Loss of XML. It requires lots of XML to developing application such as configurations or notations. After we learn about the Spring framework, it may take some time to develop a Spring application because of configurations. What if there is something easier for you to build a Spring application? Meet the Spring Boot. Spring Boot is a module of Spring framework. It allows us to build a standalone application with as minimum as possible configurations. It is widely used to develop a Spring-based application or RESTful web services. So what makes it different from the Spring framework? It allows you to create standalone applications. It comes with the embedded application server such as Tomcat or Jetty, unlike the Spring framework that need to configure the server for the application. It comes with the concept of a starter in the POMS XML file that takes care of downloading Maven dependencies based on requirements instead of manually defining. This is a primary feature of Spring Boot. It will automatically configure the classes based on the requirements by annotations. We know about the overview of Spring and Spring Boot framework. So in the next step, let's try to create a simple RESTful web service using Spring Boot. For prerequisites, Spring Boot requires a few things you need to have, such as Java Development Kit or JDK version 8 or later, Maven 3 or later, Spring Framework 5 build snapshot, and IDE such as NetBeans, IntelliJ IDEas, Spring ToolSuite, or whatever you're compatible with. We will try to create the RESTful web service that can show, add, update, and delete the information of students. First of all, we can easily create the Spring Boot project by using Spring Initializer web application that you can configure all about things that you want to use and dependency that you want to use in the project. In this case, we want Spring Web, Spring Data, JPA, Lombard, and MySQL Diver for developing our RESTful API. After finished selecting the dependency, we can download the project and open in the IDE that you compatible with. In this case, I used IntelliJ IDEA. After opening a project, it may take some time to resolve dependency, so you will need to wait for a bit. And to make it short, I will skip to the part that all the code is finished and will describe about the detail of the project. Let's look into detail of this Spring Boot project. So we will start with the POMS.xml. This is like a starter for Maven configuration. So in the future, if you want to add more dependency, you can add it in here. And it will automatically resolve the dependency for you. So it's very convenient. And let's look into the application properties. This is all properties that we need to configure for our web service, such as ports that will the web service will run on. And context part is the default part of our web service. And data source URL is the URL of the database that we use with username and password. JPA, the property is that tell the JPA that we will use the driver of MySQL. JPA is a object relational mapping that can map the cars to the entity and create into the table. DTL auto creates is it will create every time we start the server. So let's look into the layers of Spring. Start with the entity. In Spring Boot, the popular uh, structure is to define the layers. So there will be the 4 layers. That is entity, service, repository, and controller. In the entity class is where we want to map it to the table. So these are fields we have, and we need to specify primary key for it. So in this case, ID. With generation type auto, it will auto create the ID first. So next is a student repository. To define that which class is which layer, we need to add annotation for it. In this case, this interface is repository, so that we add the repository annotation to it. Repository is a persistence layer that will communicate with the database via JPA ORM. So next is service. Service layer is all about the business logic of our web service. So we need to specify the annotation service for it. And this is what I mentioned before in last section. The key concept of the Spring, that is dependency injection. So after we add annotation auto while to the student repository, we can it will uh, give the object of this class for us without knowing where they come from and without creating the new instance. So this is very lightweight and loosely coupled. And in here we have all the methods that we need. Get our student, get student by ID, create student, update student, and delete student. This is all about the service layer. And next and the last one is controller layers, the toughest layer. In this controller layers is represent our API. So to use the controller layer, we need to add annotation controller or list controller to the class and add request mapping for tell that this API will access by this part. And this also the auto while, that also the dependency injecting. We can specify get mapping, post mapping, put mapping, and delete mapping. So that is all about the structure and overall of Spring Boot project. So the next step, we will test our web service with a Postman, that is a developer tools for testing API. So let's test our API. Start from the get or student method. We not get anything here because we didn't add something, some student information to the database. So we start the post method. We have the body of student. So let's test. Okay, it create this student with the ID of 1. So let's check again with the get student. Okay, and if we insert another student, okay, our API is work. So let's get the student by their ID. Let's start with the student ID of 1. Okay, this part is work. So if you want to update the student information, okay, it's work. Let's see our output again. Here we see that the student of ID1 is changed from John to Jane, and the age is changed. So with the delete method, okay, student of ID1 is deleted. So this is all about uh, the student API, a simple, basic, RESTful web service example for by using Spring Boot.